break, you probably saw this, but just in case you didn't, I put a little bit of info in the chat about parthenocarpy, and the short answer is that fruits develop through the maturation of an unfertilized ovary, mainly due to hormones, auxin being a big one. If you're interested, I put a little YouTube video in the chat too if you want to see like a diagram and get some more details. Um, and yeah, that's a great answer, Tim. Thanks for expanding a bit on the rootstock scion dwarfing thing too. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again and get into the next section. Okay.
There was a quick question about fig wasps, whether we get them in Sonoma County.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that pollination does happen. Yeah. So if you see, um, yeah, figs growing, they have, and they look normal and everything. They've been pollinated. The fig wasps have been there and done their job there. So yeah, thankfully the answer is yes. So we can eat figs here. Okay. So, oh, sorry. Trying to do two things at once. Okay. All right, so we're back now for part two for pruning and protection. So I'm going to go over a broad intro, and then I'll also talk a little bit about protection from frost and sunburn too. So pruning is really, really important for most fruit trees. So pruning is the strategic and thoughtful. Um, Let me start over. Sorry. Strategic and thoughtful pruning promotes good tree health. So, I know sometimes it can be hard to convince folks who've never done this before that um, cutting off branches is actually good for the tree. But I think, usually when I talk about it, I'll kind of frame it as like a haircut. It's like it's healthy as long as you do it in a way that's um, strategic and thoughtful. It's healthy and ultimately a good thing. So we're going for good tree health, and ultimately that's going to also have aesthetic benefits as well for your tree. So we're talking about goals like architecture. We want good tree architecture, but we also want to remove diseases as well, diseased branches through pruning. And typically people prune in the dormant season, sometimes in the spring and summer as needed. It kind of depends on the fruit tree and exactly what your trees need. So the big reason you want to prune is for tree architecture. So this allows you to open up the canopy and promote optimal capture of sunlight. It promotes functional architecture for easy management. It just makes your job a lot easier later, whether you're harvesting or using integrated pest management strategies or whatever you're doing out there. It just makes things a lot easier and more manageable for you, and it ensures structural integrity as well. So, you don't want lopsided trees where, you have one giant branch that might break off or something. So this kind of helps keep things structurally sound. And here's kind of a little diagram of what that might look like. Um, might be some selective cuts here and there just to keep your tree relatively small and manageable. So pruning supports high quality fruit production too. This really does have a big impact on your actual fruit production, quality, and amount. It helps promote good fruit size because fruit actually compete with each other um, uh, for water, for nutrients, for carbohydrates. So pruning can help with that as well, reduce that competition. It helps stimulate new fruiting wood. It regulates crop production and minimizes alternate bearing to some degree as well. And then the other big reason is disease removal. So we want to remove diseased tissue like what you're seeing here. This isn't an apple tree. These are branch canker pathogens. It's fungal pathogens. And so we want to trim that out and cut that out. So this can help reduce the severity of pathogens and also reduce disease spread throughout the orchard because the diseases in this branch would proliferate, release spores that could float over to other branches. So we want to remove disease prunings out of the orchard as promptly as we can because piles of infected prunings on the ground actually can reinfect open wounds if they're left on the orchard floor or around your tree. Those spores can disperse up and reinfect your trees. So definitely want to get that out of the area as soon as you can, and definitely before it rains. So trees that do not get pruned develop really dense canopies. I'm sure you all have probably seen that before. I know I have. It can be really easy to let this happen if you're not on top of it. Trees that don't get pruned have poor light interception, poor flower bud formation, low fruit set, and generally just lower quality fruit. So an important concept here is a meristem. So a meristem is just a group of cells that are capable of continued growth and differentiation. So these are kind of like your growing points. And this is, I think, just a couple cool little photos and of what this might look like here. So this is the up close version, but then what this looks like is, your buds that you might see, on your branches, lateral and terminal buds. So these are basically your growing points. And so when you're making pruning cuts, there are a couple different types of cuts that you're going to make. So one is called heading cuts. So with this, only the terminal part of a shoot is removed, or the very end. And the goal of a heading cut is to shorten the branch. So say you've got a branch, a heading cut would just be to cut here. And so you're taking it and you're bringing it back a little bit, making it shorter. Topping is an extreme heading cut that you do when the tree is young. And this can actually be really helpful, keeping your tree small, manageable, not out of control. And it sets up your tree for success later on. It feels really drastic. I mean, for me personally, I think for a lot of people, it can feel extreme. And you might think, oh my gosh, how's this tree ever going to grow back out of this? But it can be really, really helpful. So this is where you have the tree, you cut it back to about 2 to 3 feet above ground level, so pretty short. And the goal is to encourage lateral growth out to the sides and reduce tree size, specifically tree height. So these are pretty important cuts to make if you want to have small trees and not have to get on ladders and stuff like that. Thinning cuts, on the other hand, is where you remove an entire shoot. So here, our goal is to improve light interception, maintain vigor, minimize excess fruiting. So here we're just thinning out selectively to kind of open up the canopy a little bit. And so here's what that looks like. Instead of, taking the branch off like up here where my mouse is, instead we're coming over here and taking this side branch off so it's more or less flush with that branch. So we're taking the whole thing. And so here's a really nice diagram showing these different types of cuts. So we've got the before on the left-hand side and the after on the right. So we have all these little A's that represent thinning cuts, where you can see, oh, there used to be like a lot of little branches and shoots over here, and now after pruning, they've really thinned those out so that we have more light interception, more airflow. It's easier to just reach in and harvest fruit. But then they also did a heading cut where they took the total tree height down a little bit. Honestly, not that much, but a little bit. And for this diagram, it's helpful to see that, that's an example of a heading cut where you're taking the height back. And then sort of zooming out and thinking big picture about tree architecture, there's different training and pruning systems that you might choose. So you might go with an open center vase-shaped training system and pruning system where it really is kind of like open. It's more kind of wider. It goes out to the sides more than upwards. Or you might go for a central leader. I personally wouldn't really recommend a central leader for most fruit trees, especially in like the backyard setting. I just think that it can be really hard. Unless you want to get on ladders or use the fruit picker baskets, that kind of thing. Central leader tends to just be a little bit taller. And that's where you do actually maintain that central middle branch that's just going straight up and, maybe not doing so many heading cuts or maybe no heading cuts at all. Again, I think for me, this is unmanageable. I wouldn't really want to do this in my backyard, but I just want everyone to know that that is another option. And some folks choose to go that way. So if you go with an open center vase shaped option, this is kind of the timeline here. So at planting, you've got your tree, it's in the ground. I would personally recommend letting the root system develop a little bit, get established, and then maybe a year or two later doing a heading cut where you take it down quite a bit once you can tell that the tree's doing well. And then from there, it's sometimes it can be really surprising and awesome to see how trees respond to that because they'll send out all of these lateral branches that go out to the sides, which is what we want for this training system. And then, after one season, let's say you come back in and you prune some more, you keep it manageable, whatever height makes sense for you. So that's kind of like your steps for this particular tree shape. And here's what it looks like in real life. These are pretty sparse. I think in our region, these large scaffold branches would probably get sunburned pretty bad. I think it might be nice to leave a little bit more branches in on a tree like this. But this does really show you pretty nicely how the open center vase shaped trees can look. And here's another example actually from my neighbor's yard where you can really see kind of nicely the open center vase shaped tree. And it's not that as short. It's actually a little bit taller. Um, I probably wouldn't go any taller than that personally. These are prunus. But then what I like about this photo on the right is just you can see with the yellow arrows, it's really clear where you can see people made decisions with pruning cuts in the past and then how these shoots circled in red just like shot out, right below those pruning cuts. So you can really see nicely how those decisions were made and then those buds were all the tree's energy and resources were redirected into those shoots pretty nicely. Okay, so for a central leader, here's maybe what your timeline might look like, where you start at planting, your tree's in the ground. Over time, you're going to have that central leader in the middle with some scaffold branches on the side. And then over time, scaffold branches are chosen, spaced relatively evenly up and around that central leader. And you can see sometimes people might secure them with ties and that kind of thing. So that's how that timeline tends to work. I have to spend a moment on water sprouts and suckers. This is really important. These are vegetative shoots that are really vigorous. They compete for resources with fruiting wood. So they're basically hogging carbohydrates, water, and nutrients, but they're not going to fruit ever, really. So they're kind of just opportunistic vegetative growth, and it's really important to prune them out. So you want to find suckers at the base of your tree. So they're going to be growing out down here, pruning all of those guys out. And then also you're going to find water sprouts, usually on like scaffold branches, and they're going to be going straight up. So the nice way to be able to tell, with suckers it's pretty easy because they're just at the base of the trunk and you just want the trunk there without those. But sometimes it can be hard to tell between water sprouts and like a normal branch that could produce fruit. So I always just look for branches that go straight up like this, like super vertical, and they're usually pretty bare. They're not going to have like nearly as many spurs, if any spurs at all. There's just not as much going on those branches. So that's usually how I look for water sprouts. And then you just prune them out down here, flush with that branch that they're on. So that's going to reduce competition and also just maintain better tree structure in the long run too. So here's just another photo of a pretty, what looks like pretty intense topping cut, but actually this is really normal. And this, again, allows you then the tree to funnel its resources into these lateral branches that go out horizontally, which ultimately leads to a tree that looks like this. So when you're pruning, you want to make sure that you're not leaving stubs. You want to, cut flush with the remaining branch for those thinning cuts. And then that will reduce the risk of infection. But if you leave, sizable stubs, that's not so great because water can pool there and increase the risk of infection. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about fruit thinning. So this is the removal of flowers or young immature fruit. This limits fruit number and increases fruit size. It reduces the risk of overloading branches. It's used in a lot of different fruit crops, with some exceptions like cherries. But basically, the earlier the better to do this and the easier. It kind of depends, I mean, sometimes I think thinning out fruit that, is maybe around this size, you can see it when it's reached this point. Removing flowers feels a little bit dicey because if you get a frost or something, maybe you wish you had had those flowers, they had stuck around. So I think going with like young, immature fruit is probably your safest bet, just to see, okay, how much fruit do I actually have, and then going through and taking out um, selectively taking out fruit so that you have more evenly spaced fruit. And like I mentioned before, each one of these fruits competes with each other for nutrients and water. So this kind of reduces that strain on the fruit. And then ultimately, you're going to have larger fruit, higher quality fruit, less issues with pests and stuff like that. So this is really helpful, especially if you only have a couple trees. This is usually pretty easy. It's not going to take a ton of time. If you have a lot of trees, of course, you want to budget in some time for this, but it can be really helpful. And this is another one of those things, along with pruning, where, if you're explaining this to someone, someone asks you about this and they're like, what? I have to pick my fruit before it's ready. It feels, I think for a lot of folks, it can feel like a little painful. And myself included, I totally get it, to take fruit off and, oh, I could have eaten that fruit, but ultimately you're going to get better fruit because you're doing this. And same with pruning. It can feel a little bit painful, but it just at first, but just know that it's good for the tree and it will be good for you as well. Another thing is sunburn. So this is a really big issue in our region. I know sunburn happens on a lot of different fruit trees here. So this is what that damage looks like. We've got this kind of crinkled, dark area. Um, this is basically just bark damage, but it can really compromise tree health and then open up that tree area for infections and whatnot. So it's not good. But there's a pretty simple thing you can do to prevent this. So you want to whitewash your trunks to protect them from sunburn. And you could even do this on some of the larger scaffold branches too. So this is going to reflect light, reduce bark heating, and you can apply this white interior latex paint that's diluted with an equal portion of water. So it's 50-50. You can also use like loosely tied tree wraps. There are other options. And then another big thing you can do is make sure you're irrigating enough, because if your trees are really water stressed, they are going to be more susceptible to sunburn damage. So those are some strategies that can really help with that. Bark splitting can happen after warm winter days, stimulate bark expansion, but then maybe a cold night causes that really quick contraction. So whitewash can help mitigate that too by just kind of keeping temperatures a little bit less extreme. And of course, I have to talk about frost protection too. So this is what frost damage can look like on peach blossoms and also on citrus. Sometimes on citrus, it kind of looks like the edges of the canopy are burned a little bit. Sometimes trees recover from that if it's minor, just fine. And then other times on fruit, it almost kind of looks like pest damage to me, but it's actually frost damage. So just good to know what this can look like. So what can you do about this? Prevention is always the best place to start. So if you can choose cultivars that are cold hardy, that's great. That ripen early, so you can harvest them early, so they're not, on the tree for too long into the winter, like with apples. Selecting a south-facing site, just in general, making sure that you're planting somewhere that gets enough sunlight, enough heat, enough warmth is good. Also, starting fertilizing after the last frost, but not before, to prevent new growth that could freeze is important too. You don't want to start fertilizing too early. Um, Not pruning uh, in the fall and winter. Wait. Oh, I think I might have had a typo here, but basically being thoughtful about when you prune. So, for instance, like if you're worried about stimulating new growth from pruning, you might want to wait to prune until like late winter, so that if you think that you might stimulate new growth without pruning, at least it's happening in the spring when it should happen. Keeping trees well irrigated to prevent stress. Irrigating when a frost is predicted can help too. A lot of commercial growers do this. might see it in vineyards as well, where they'll irrigate to try to mitigate the effects of frost when that's predicted. So moist soil holds on to more heat than dry soil. Water releases heat as it freezes, so that can actually help a little bit. And of course, you can use things like thermal wraps on the trunk, sawdust, fill collars. You can protect foliage with suspended canvas canopies that hang all the way to the ground and trap heat, and use tools like that. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to pause before we go to part three.
Okay. We have tons of questions, really a
Great.
good bunch
Okay.
of good questions. One was about diseased branches going to the county composting. Should you put them there or should you put them in the trash?
That's a good question. I think that if county composting gets compost up to temperature, which I believe it does and it should, then I think that's probably fine. Um, because the goal there is to kill off any pathogens. So as long as, it's getting up to temp, I think it's fine to put it in your green bin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, two questions about topping, that initial topping. So, um, the best recommended number or range in terms of size of the first topping, is it 18, 24, or 30? And then the second one was how many buds to leave below the topping cut?
Oh, yeah. Good questions. Let's 18, 24, 30. Let's see. I think I'm not sure off the top of my head. It seems like it might depend on the type of fruit tree and like, yeah, how many buds you see below. I mean, it can be kind of variable. Um, yeah, you don't want to go down too far. Does the handbook say anything specific about like justifying why one height versus another? Because I haven't kind of gotten that detailed before.
Yes, it does.
Okay, what does that book say?
It all depends on what your orchard needs in terms of a height from the ground to the bottom of a scaffold. So if you've got a lot of material, let's say equipment that needs to get underneath that tree, you want that scaffold to be a little higher. So it's all dependent. It's variable depending on what you need.
Yeah, and I know in commercial systems, like, because before this I worked in almond systems, like this was a big topic where you want to, because they use mechanical harvesters, they're like, okay, we need to be really careful about that distance, like you're saying, Tim, in between like the ground and our first scaffold branch, because we have to get our harvesters in there. For, backyard growers though, I don't know, it might be a little bit more, you might have more flexibility, you might have more wiggle room, and it might be more about aesthetics or, how tall you are. I'm relatively short. I would want them a little bit lower personally, so because you're not dealing with like mechanical harvesters, I feel like
No,
have some more wiggle
from
room.
from
Yeah.
my experience, it would be better to be a little higher. So 2 to, let's say, 24 to 30 inches. So you can get underneath, get your mulch under there,
Mm,
not, make sure it doesn't get right up against the trunk, and making sure you can get under and manage your irrigation, if you've got drip irrigation, all those little variables. Also doing any weeding underneath,
yeah.
it's better to get higher scaffold, say 24 to 30 inches.
And
Okay.
then,
Yeah. And
yeah.
good points about weeding too. And I feel like airflow would be another benefit of having being between like 24 and 30 inches rather than 18 is you're just gonna have better airflow and probably yeah, that has a lot of benefits too. Sorry, was someone else gonna say something?
On another question was how old is too old to top a tree?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I know, hard one.
That's a tough question. Yeah, I mean earlier, in probably the first 5 years is ideal. Um, you can do major heading cuts on old trees, like substantial, like really pretty old trees. I would just take it, the way I would approach this is take it one step at a time. So instead of doing a big heading cut on an older tree, I would just start with maybe 3 or 4 heading cuts a little bit higher up, depending on how big the tree is, and then over the years, take it down each year until maybe it's more of a process of like, over 2, 3, 4 years, you reduce tree size dramatically with heading cuts, but you don't just, chop it down at the base, to start with. Does that make sense? I know that's a way to reinvigorate like older trees. Does anyone have anything to add with that?
I saw an orchard last winter where the grower had actually done a lot of topping cuts when the trees were between 5 and 10 years old. But that's a real risk taker in his case. And there was you had a graphic before where they did a redirect. They actually had a lateral shortly below where they did the topping cut. So they just actually redirected the central lead.
Cool. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
do a lot with that.
All right. Here's a question. When you do a re-leadering cut, do you need to leave any branches?
Can you say more about that? So re-leadering. So does that mean like you have a
Foley,
central leader, but you want a different one, so you chop that one down and you encourage the other one to go? Is that what that means?
Foley, you want to unmute?
What I was reading when you were writing, so the cuts at the 24 inches, let's say, do you need to leave any little branch, or can you just top it right off and leave no little branches?
I think you can go either way. If you see that there are small branches that are starting to form or buds that are starting to form, but you're like, okay, I'm gonna do
Hmm.
24 inches, and you look for it and you see those little ones, those that
Hmm.
you can tell will, then you can leave it. I think it's good to leave those because they're already sort of starting. But
Hmm.
if you don't see any there, like that's okay because they'll form and they'll come out later. So I think either way.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Cool.
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
We had some great examples last Saturday at Los Guilicos, where we were doing some topping cuts on some newly planted fruit trees, where there was actually Jenny did the selection of those fruit trees, and she found some beautiful examples where we did the topping cut and we were able to leave about 2 to 3 laterals below that 24-inch topping cut. And we headed those back to about 1 to 3 buds on those laterals that were left behind. Other than that, you can actually go to 24 inches, for example, if that's the height you want. If you have laterals you can save, great. If you don't, that's okay as well.
If you go to Instagram, you can see Tim demonstrating this on our site, and it was very good. It was excellent. Got a bunch of questions. So, can suckers and water sprouts be pruned any time of year?
Personally, I have pruned them any time of year. Yes, I think that's fine. If you have like really serious disease pressure, you might just want to consider that. I mean, you don't want to prune those out like right before rainfall if you know you have disease issues. For instance, that would be the exception. But a lot of times, like I notice them in the summer or in the like late spring. So yeah, I think pruning them out really when you see them is good just to be on top of it. Yeah.
Great.
So short
Couple,
answer is yes.
couple questions on sunburn. So, how often should you apply the whitewash? Does it have to be white? And is there any recourse if a tree has severe sunburn with open wood beneath the crinkled bark?
Yeah, so how often depends on how long it sticks around. So I know like for some folks they say, I whitewashed last year and it's already kind of fading, so I just put another coat on. So you can do it every year. You don't necessarily have to if it sticks around longer than that and if you can tell it's, not fading and it's providing a good barrier, then, you can leave it on as long as you want. But once it starts to disappear, you want to reapply. Sorry, I forgot the other ones.
Uh, does it have to be white?
Oh, yes. So the point there is that white is going to reflect the sunlight and the heat, and so yeah, white is definitely best. Light color, I don't know. I can't speak to like maybe using a different color as long as it's light-ish, but I think white is gonna provide the most protection.
And the last was the recourse if a tree has severe sunburn with open wood beneath crinkled bark.
Yeah, it's kind of at that point, it's kind of a bit too late. But I think, if you're going to keep that tree, if it's not so damaged that it's actively dying or, if you want to keep that tree, I think definitely applying it anyway is a good idea. Maybe to scaffold branches, the areas around it. You don't want it to get worse, but yeah, ideally you would do that at planting and then have that protection in place so that you don't get to that point because it can be a pretty severe issue.
Is it too late to prune most fruit trees now?
No, I think now it's fine. It's still, even though, yeah, some things are flowering, which is nuts. Yeah, I think it's fine to prune most things now. It's late winter, so yeah, and I think, there are some discrepancies between like, this tree versus that type of tree, pruning them at different times, but overall, I'd say go for it.
Great. And then there was a question about a frost proofing spray, wilt proof. I don't know this.
Can you say that word again? Sorry, what proof?
Wilt proof, WILTPRUF.
I have never heard of that,
I
actually.
haven't either.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think I can speak to that, but I can look it up real quick. If I don't know if we're gonna do another break or a breakout room, I could.
We'll do a breakout room next. So, is there a way to prevent suckers from returning? Was another question.
Um, Not that I know of. I think just pruning them out is what you gotta do. I think some trees are more prone to suckering than others. So if you really don't want to have to deal with it, maybe choosing one that's less likely to have them. But yeah, I think there's not much you can do about it besides just pruning them out.
Yeah,
But
sounds
usually if you do it, when you start to see them, when they're small, it's pretty easy. It just takes a minute or two to prune them out. So as long as they're small and there's not too many of them.
okay. All right. I think that's great. Let's go to breakout rooms now. So as you go to the breakout rooms, we're going to do a few people in a breakout room, automatic assignments. So consider connecting the information we heard today to the previous lectures, to what you already know, and extend what you're thinking. Okay. Challenge your thinking and then ask questions of each other. And we'll break out for about 10 minutes. And
Give everybody time to think.
oh, and yeah, and if you would give everybody time to reply, and if you could put your hand up like this to uh, indicate that you'd like to speak, so that might be a helpful thing for everybody.
Okay, so here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Stop recording. Did it go?
Yeah, okay.
You got it?
Okay, so would you like me to go to the next section or look at the questions in the chat at this point?
We had a bunch of questions about trees in containers, fruit trees in containers. So,
Yeah.
and
So it can be done, but my short answer is like for the citrus question, you can. I probably, if given the choice, I would rather plant in the ground, of course, but I know some folks don't have room for that or, don't have that option, but maybe really, really want a citrus tree. So I totally get that. And if you're going to go that route, going for like genetic dwarf varieties is the way to go, like as small as possible, so that your genetics are in your favor. That tree's going to stay as small as reasonably possible. You might still want to do some pruning nonetheless, just to make sure your tree stays healthy and stays relatively small. But yeah, given the choice, I definitely would recommend planting in the ground if you have that option. Does that kind of cover it? Let me see.
and I assume you're going to talk about care for trees in a little bit. There was a question about water, and how much water is needed for trees.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's in the next section. So I'll go ahead
Okay.
share my screen. Okay, so for part 3, we're going to cover nutrient and water management. So we'll go over nutrient requirements and water requirements. I'll talk a little bit about the benefits of compost and mulching for both of those things. And yeah, during my PhD, nutrient management in orchards was my main focus for about 4 or 5 years. So this is my favorite topic, particularly organic nutrient management for tree crops. So I really like this section. I love all of them, but this one might be my favorite. Okay, so just to start off with, fruit trees need the same elements to function and be healthy and generate fruit as every other plant needs to survive. So this list of nutrients is true for all plants. So we start with macronutrients. So these are nutrients that plants need in relatively larger amounts. So that's things like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so, if you see fertilizers that say NPK, those are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Potassium does not start with K, as I'm sure you noticed. So the reason why potassium is abbreviated as K is that's the element on the periodic table, and it comes from, I think, Latin for potassium, which is kalium. So anyway, that's more information than you needed on potassium, but if you do get confused, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, those are your big three nutrients that you need the most of. But then there's other macronutrients like calcium, magnesium that are important too. And then you have micronutrients that plants need in very, very small amounts relative to those macronutrients. So, things like iron, copper, zinc, boron. So these are things that usually you don't really have to worry about. Sometimes they can come up if you don't have enough zinc or boron, for instance. Those two are more common issues in fruit crops than the other micronutrients. But this all generally comes from soil, from fertilizers, amendments, compost, stuff like that. So I'm going to go over some big picture concepts in nutrient management because I think it's really helpful to set the stage with these ideas. So the first one is something called the law of the minimum. And this is just an idea that if one of these essential elements is low, plant functioning and yield will be low until that deficiency is lifted. So a lot of times this is represented as like a barrel metaphor where you have a barrel full of water with all of these staves, and each stave represents a different nutrient that the plant needs, and then the water represents yield in this case. So the lowest stave here, and in this figure it's potassium, that is going to be the most limiting nutrient because the water can't raise above that particular stave. So I could add as much nitrogen or calcium as I wanted to that tree, and yield wouldn't really increase, plant health wouldn't improve if I don't address that most limiting factor, which here is potassium, but it could be any of them. So then supplying that most limiting nutrient lifts the yield potential to the next most limiting thing. Another really important way of thinking about this is with a curve. So on this graph here, we have the concentration of mineral nutrients in plant tissue on the x-axis at the bottom here. So this is just the status of the nutrient. Is it deficient? Do you have enough of it? How much nitrogen do you have? That kind of thing. And then on the y-axis, we have plant growth or yield. So this is the actual plant response up here. So we start off down in this area where we're correcting a deficiency by, let's say, adding some compost or nitrogen fertilizer. And we see huge response in plant growth and yield. We do just a little bit, and it really makes a difference for the plant. And maybe, we saw these visual deficiency symptoms that I'm going to go over in a minute here, like, maybe you have really yellow chlorotic leaves, and you said, oh, that really looks like a nitrogen deficiency. But then that's going to start to go away the more you supply that nutrient. And if you didn't do that, those deficiencies would really impair plant functioning and yield. But then on the other end of the spectrum, over-fertilizing, applying too much nitrogen, for instance, can lead to problems as well. So you might see too much vigor, too much vegetative growth, reduced yield, reduced quality, environmental damage because that, the nitrogen's going off site, not good, wasted money. So really you want to be in this safe zone here, this adequate range where the concentration of your nutrient in your plant, in your tree, is enough for good functioning without being too much, too little. So I kind of think of this as like your safe zone. And there are actual number ranges that I'll talk about in a little bit if you're really curious that you can compare to and make sure that you're in that safe zone. So the goals of nutrient management, big picture, we want to supply enough nutrients to meet our crop needs and optimize plant function. We want to minimize environmental impacts, of course. It's a great idea to integrate recycled biomass whenever you can. So that might be compost or cover crops, and just be economically efficient too. So the first place to start when we're thinking about nutrient management is visual deficiency symptoms. And the good news is plants will kind of tell you what's going on sometimes, or at least give you hints. Nitrogen deficiency is probably the most common nutrient issue, especially in organically managed fruit trees. So nitrogen deficiency looks like light green foliage that's uniform. So like the whole leaf is kind of uniformly pale green, light yellow. You don't have like patches of yellow. It's just like the whole leaf is pretty pale, and that's consistent across leaves. You might see poor shoot growth, small leaves. This can reduce, growth, fruit size, and yield. So it does affect, your fruit as well. But I really think the best place to start with nitrogen deficiency is just like looking for this sort of uniform yellowing of your leaves. And sometimes it's transient, it might just be that it's wintertime, especially for evergreen fruit trees like olives and citrus, for leaves that don't, for trees that don't lose their leaves, that leaf yellowing can happen in the wintertime when nitrogen is not really readily available in the soil because it's cold. There's not as much biological activity cycling that nitrogen. There's not as much water uptake or nutrient uptake happening. So it's just kind of sluggish. So these deficiency symptoms might disappear then when root activity and nitrogen uptake really increase in the spring and summer. So just bear that in mind too. It might not last. So that chlorosis is a really good clue about what might be happening. Might kind of increase a little bit later once things pick up if you do have nitrogen in your soil. But if you don't, it's a good idea, of course, to add some fertilizer or compost or both. And then on the other hand, too much nitrogen can lead to this really dark green foliage, as well as just excess leaves, shoot growth, just way more shoot growth than you want, sometimes at the expense of fruit production. And so when you have too much nitrogen, maybe you applied a little bit too much fertilizer, that kind of thing. So from there, you can just ease up on those applications if you're doing that and try to prune some of that growth out. Moving on to potassium. So potassium deficiency is pretty common in sandy soils. And I know around the county, there's some areas where we do have pretty sandy soil. And I know potassium deficiency can come up because of that. Sandy soil, I don't know if you've done your soil class yet or not, but sandy soil has lower cation exchange capacity, which basically just means it doesn't retain cations quite so well. And potassium is a cation, so it kind of just loses potassium easier. So what this looks like in trees, this might be interveinal chlorosis, those sort of like yellowing between veins. It might be scorched leaf margins and tips, leaf cupping, like this photo in the bottom right shows it pretty well. Leaf cupping or curling upwards, shoot dieback, and small fruit. So this is more like edge burn and leaf cupping. Zinc deficiency, not as common, but does happen in fruit crops, particularly apples. This causes little leaves, tiny little small leaves like you can see in this photo in the bottom left here. And also areas of the branches without any leaves, and this interveinal chlorosis where in between the veins it gets kind of yellow. So that's what zinc deficiency can look like. And one more, we've got calcium deficiency symptoms. So to me, this looks almost like a disease, but it's actually a calcium deficiency, and it's called bitter pit in apples. It looks like a disease, but it's actually an issue more related to low calcium uptake. And sometimes it can be related to low water uptake too, because plants rely on water uptake to transport nutrients. So maybe you actually have plenty of calcium in your soil, your tree's just not taking up enough water. So, you could always just try irrigating a little bit more if you see something like that and see if that helps correct the issue. If not, you could also just apply some calcium fertilizer as well. So what this causes though is depressed areas on the fruit surface, like you can see in this photo, small brown corky areas in the fruit, not great for fruit quality. So anything you can do to correct that is good. And then also boron deficiency in apples can cause this kind of misshapen fruit with corking, small leaves, reduced shoot growth, and reduced fruit set. And these symptoms are similar in other fruits too. A lot of times boron deficiency just causes like crinkling and distortion. I would say that's the most common issue with boron. So, in the big picture, you want to ask yourself, okay, how much nutrients do I need to apply? What type? When do I need to put them on the ground? And where specifically should they go? And so in traditional nutrient management, we think about the right source, rate, timing, and placement. And all of this information is conveniently located on the label for whatever product you choose. So this is just an example, but there's so many different products out there that I think it's always good to just start with, okay, what kind of fruit tree do I have? And then going and finding a product at your local garden store that is, designed for that type of fruit tree if you can, or even just a generic like fruit tree fertilizer. And there's tons of organic options out there too. And then once you choose your product, then saying, okay, what do I need to do specifically? And the label will have directions for all of this stuff. Of course, with compost or like organic matter amendments, it's a different story. But with a product like this, it should tell you everything. So yeah, just want to emphasize, especially when you're talking to the public, just encouraging people to read the label. I know it's not always the most exciting thing. Sometimes the text is really small and hard to read, but whether it's fertilizer or pesticides or anything else, just whatever product people choose, making sure they follow the label instructions is very important. So your rate is really going to depend on the demand of your tree, how big your tree is, the product ingredients, but the goal really is just to replace the nutrients you export in the fruit. So every time you harvest fruit, you're removing those nutrients off site. So you want to replenish them, and you want to stay in this sort of safe zone where you're not deficient, but you're also not overdoing it. Your source could be organic or synthetic. Either way, your plant's going to take up nutrients and benefit from it. Your placement, just you want to put it over the tree roots in the irrigation zone. So that way, when you irrigate, that water is going to move the nutrients into the root zone and the tree roots will be able to take it up. And then for timing, you just want to match nutrient availability with the timing of plant nutrient demand. So typically, tree crops are going to be taking up nutrients in the spring and summer. So you could apply in early spring, get things off to a strong start, maybe put more down in the summer if you see signs of deficiencies, but you can kind of play that one by ear. So applying compost is a great place to start if you think there might be a deficiency because it has a lot of different nutrients. Of course, nitrogen, from compost, it might not be as readily available. So if you think nitrogen could be an issue, you could always do compost plus some nitrogen fertilizer because compost often immobilizes a little bit of nitrogen. So you could always do a combination if you want. There might be enough nutrients in the soil, but if conditions are cold or the soil is too dry, there might be not enough uptake by plant roots. So you could always just make sure you're irrigating enough as well. And if it's really early in the spring and you're seeing some deficiency signs, just waiting until things warm up a little bit and plant growth kicks off some more could be good too. So there's tons of organic sources, like I mentioned. I'm not going to get into the details here, but you'll have this table if you want it. There's so many different sources like fish meal, kelp meal, bone meal, feather meal, and they all kind of have different ranges in terms of concentrations of nutrients. These are just ballpark ranges. Again, like every product's going to tell you specifically what's in it, but this just kind of shows you, okay, if I want something that has relatively high nitrogen, I might want to go with like fish meal product or blood meal or feather meal, that kind of thing. So you can bear that in mind just depending on what you're looking for. And here's some more examples. Not going to get into it too much, but all this to say there's a lot out there, so you should have lots of options. Thinking through timing a bit more, like I mentioned, your timing of nutrient availability should match the timing of crop demand. So, just as one example for olives, when do they really need available nutrients? It's mainly in the spring and summer, and that's true for most tree crops, probably all tree crops. So you want to ensure nitrogen is in the root zone right before uptake in the early spring, just ahead of shoot growth and bloom. So that would be around here. And then you can apply potassium and boron in the winter so that the rain actually helps it move into the root zone for spring uptake. The exception there, of course, is if you're on sandy soil, potassium is just going to wash straight out. So clay soil, that timing should be fine. If you're on sandy soil and you need to apply potassium, maybe just wait until right before the spring, and you'll get either a rain event or irrigated in. So that does kind of matter a little bit, your soil type. And if you're really interested in this, there's an awesome website, the California Crop Fertilization Guidelines. This is by UC Davis and CDFA. This is mainly for agriculture, but I think all of it's relevant for any tree crop, even if you just have a couple fruit trees. And I love this because it's kind of visual. I'm a visual person personally, but it shows you these different stages, and there's like little drop-down tabs where you can see, when to apply different fertilizers and that kind of thing. So just so you know, it's out there. So big picture, we want to start with a well-rounded fertilizer approach that meets the tree's basic needs with the right source, rate, timing, and placement. And it's always a great idea to build soil organic matter. So you want to add organic matter amendments, keep living roots in the soil if you can. Cover crops might make sense in some situations, maybe not in others, depending on how much space you've got. Keeping the soil covered is a good idea with like a mulch, and generally minimizing soil disturbance. But, you want to be responsive and not too prescriptive. There's no, one right way to do this. It really depends on your tree, what it is telling you with its symptoms, how it's growing, how much it's growing or not growing. And so you really just want to be observant and keep an eye on your tree and see what it needs over time. So getting now into water management. So regular irrigation is needed for good growth conditions and healthy fruit trees. So if you can set up irrigation, it's really important to do that. Supplying water prevents damaging levels of tree stress. And you want to start by choosing cultivars that have relatively low water requirements that you can meet. I know different people have different constraints around how much water they have access to, commercial growers, but then even in a backyard setting, how much water do you really want to be using, on a regular basis during the summer to keep trees alive and keep them healthy? That might actually influence how many trees you plant or which ones, that kind of thing. So a big question, to ask yourself or encourage other people to ask is, do you have enough water to meet tree crop needs? How much? So that means that you're going to need to know the water needs of your crop. So how much does it need? How often? And this really depends on evapotranspiration. So you probably heard this term. It's abbreviated to ET, and that's just daily water use. So ET is equal to the amount of water evaporating from the soil surface and also the water used or transpired by the tree. So it's a really long word, but basically we're just combining the words evaporation and transpiration. And this is just the total water that's going to the atmosphere. So water use by fruit trees is relatively similar between species and more different between small to large tree size. So tree size is going to have a bigger impact on water needs than species, generally speaking. And of course, this was really dependent on your climate conditions. I know around the county we have tons of microclimates, Some places it's really hot, some places it's super cool, most of the time closer to the coast in foggy areas. So it really depends on how much demand there is based on your climate as well. But just as an example, let's say on a hot summer day that demands a quarter inch of water, a small tree that's like, let's say 6 by 6 feet might use around 5 gallons of water daily, whereas like a 10 by 10 foot tree might use up to 15 gallons of water daily. So again, thinking through, okay, how much water do I really want to use for my fruit trees, before you go out and select your trees and plant and everything is really important. And yeah, I just wanted to emphasize with all these little arrows here, different tree sizes will have different ET and water needs. So the smaller the tree, the less water you'll need to use. And I just want to emphasize that, trees are pretty resilient, but at a certain point, severe drought stress can have really pretty damaging effects. It can permanently damage trees, reduce tree health. And this is due to something called embolisms, which are basically hydraulic failure in the xylem. It's like these little air bubbles that happen, and they actually make this like pop sound. Where the water column basically breaks. And so this is pretty bad and can cause some severe issues. And in the long term, your tree's just not going to be as healthy, it won't be as functional, that kind of thing. So we want to try to avoid these. So there are also visual symptoms of drought stress as well, as nutrients. And sometimes they look kind of similar, especially, potassium deficiency looks a whole lot like water stress. In both cases, we have this marginal necrosis, the crispy edges on your leaves. But you also have a lot of other things going on with water stress where, of course, the first thing you're going to see is just wilting. So that's this loss of turgor pressure, which is that internal pressure in the leaf of the water kind of like pressing outward, keeping the leaf up and open. So the first thing you're going to see is wilting. But then if it's pretty bad, you might see that dead leaf tissue on the edges, bark cracking, stunted growth. If it's really bad, it can defoliate trees and kill trees. So these are all things, of course, we want to try to avoid. And another thing you can do, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, is learning about your soil texture at your site. So soil texture is going to influence the soil's water holding capacity. Clay soil is going to hold on to water a lot better than sandy soil. And, there can be pros and cons to that, of course. In the wintertime, waterlogging in clay soil can be a problem. But, at the other hand, in the height of summer, clay soil is probably going to stay a bit wetter than sandy soil. So there's always trade-offs, of course. And ideally, you'd have something kind of in the middle. So you want to know your soil type and how it affects water movement, drainage, infiltration, where does water go, where does water stay, where does it pool versus where does it flow on your property. And you can always dig down to see how far the water infiltrated into the soil after you irrigate. I think that's just a great thing to do at some point, just to know, okay, if I irrigate for this long, with the pressure that I've got, like what does this really look like in the soil? And yeah, that will help you make sure that you're not over irrigating or under irrigating. Mulch is very popular, which is good. It improves water infiltration. It provides this physical barrier on the soil surface that reduces evapotranspiration or evaporation from the soil surface. It keeps more water in the root zone. It suppresses weeds. Mulch is great, but we don't want to use too much. I think starting with 3 inches or less is great. You'll get all of these benefits with that amount. But if you use too much, like, I don't know, 6, 8, 12 inches of mulch, that can lead to waterlogging and actually kill roots because roots need oxygen to respire in the soil. So we don't want to do that. It can also cause nitrogen issues because microbes in the mulch will gobble up any nitrogen they can get, and then that reduces the nitrogen available for the tree. So anyway, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing with mulch. So just don't do maybe more than like 3 or 4 inches to start with and just see how that goes. Also, as you're thinking through your irrigation, you want to consider that most roots are usually concentrated in that upper 2 to 3 feet of soil, especially if you're drip irrigating. So you don't really need to irrigate too much deeper than that. Drip irrigation is more efficient than micro sprinklers, broadly speaking. You're just going to have less water loss to evaporation. It's just more efficient across the board, really. You're just providing only what the tree needs and nothing more than that. So a little bit more on organic matter amendments. So these are just soil amendments that come from something that used to be alive. So it might be compost, wood chip mulch, leaf litter, grass clippings, stuff like that. Um, so these are used to provide nutrients for plants. It also can create a really nice mulch layer on the soil surface and promote soil health. So I'm going to spend just a moment on soil health because I think it's a really important concept that sometimes can feel kind of confusing or vague. So I'm going to break it down a little bit here. Soil health is basically soil functioning. And so you can think about soil health in these three categories where we have chemical functions of the soil. So that's things like fertility. So that's your nutrients, your pH, other stuff like that. You have your physical soil structure that provides lots of benefits like water infiltration, stability, erosion resistance, stuff like that. So your physical soil health components are your structural components. And then biological, that's just everything that's alive. So microbes, worms, and so on, and all of their byproducts. Um, Soil health really does emphasize that biological component, but all three of these are totally intertwined. I break them up here because it's easier to talk about it this way, but in real life, all of these things affect each other constantly. So your soil chemical components govern nutrient supply for plants. Soil physical things govern aeration, water availability for plant uptake, and soil biological components improve those other two, the chemical and physical functioning. There's a lot of feedback loops there. And, some microbes form mutualisms that help plants like mycorrhizae or rhizobia. And then other microbes suppress plant pathogens. So there's all kinds of benefits to improving soil health that you get for all of these functions. And really the goal, all of this stuff in the soil is fascinating and super cool, but ultimately the goal is to have healthy plants that are functional, that have access to nutrients and water, pest suppression, that kind of thing. So I think remembering that that is ultimately the goal, is to create healthy soil so you can have healthy plants and good fruit production. And like I mentioned, I had these separate, but really they're, of course, all interconnected. Okay, so I'm going to take a break for our last section on IPM.
Sounds great. Let's answer a few questions and then we'll take a 10-minute break after we answer questions. So here's the first one. If mature fruit trees are consistently producing adequate fruit that looks and tastes good, is it still necessary to apply nutrients or fertilizer?
I would say probably not. If you're happy with how things look, I think the key thing is being able to recognize those symptoms, because I think a lot of folks don't know that their trees are deficient, and those deficiencies do lead to things like increased pest susceptibility and stuff like that. So yeah, the short answer I think is probably, if you're happy with how things look and you're confident that you don't have nutrient deficiencies just based on visuals, yeah, there's probably no need. And I think, like, for me, I fertilize my citrus trees like every other year. I don't even fertilize them every year. So I think it really just depends on your situation and what your goal is. Yeah.
That's a good one. Next, there was a question about a specific tree already flowering, but the question was, is it okay to fertilize now since since the tree is already flowering?
I'm glad you asked. That's great. I would personally wait because it's still really early, and I have a hunch we'll probably get frost at some point. And I wouldn't want to push out too. So if you were to apply fertilizer right now, that would probably prompt more growth than if you didn't. And so I think just waiting a little bit until we're closer to the threat of frost passing would probably be the way to go, just because it's still so early. But yeah, there are a lot of things flowering right now. It's true.
Hey, Pat, would you unmute yourself? Because I don't think I understand the question. I think you're saying that rain is necessary for all
Yeah,
of the
no,
nutrients.
I'm sorry, because the one of the slides showed that the two other nutrients was good to use them in the winter because the rain, helps those nutrients get down to the roots. But I was wondering, why isn't that also the case for nitrogen?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for asking. So nitrogen usually in the soil is exists in the form of nitrate, which is negatively charged. So it's this little molecule, nitrate, that has a little negative charge, and the soil itself is negatively charged. So the soil doesn't really retain nitrate that well because they're both, overall negative. So nitrate's really leaky. Like the way people talk about it is like it leaks out of the system really quickly, pretty easily. It's ephemeral. It doesn't really stick around. Nitrogen can also go up into the atmosphere. It's volatile. So the reason why we sometimes it's helpful to wait to apply nitrogen fertilizer until the spring, when you're confident it's the right time to apply it. There's you know more growth happening is because it's so leaky and it doesn't stick around that much. So timing that nitrogen application with the timing of crop uptake is really helpful. But if you have compost, if you're applying nitrogen in the form of compost, then you can put your compost down anytime really in the wintertime, and that rain will help break down the compost and move some of that nitrogen into the soil. So it depends on what form. If it's like fertilizer where your nitrogen is ready to go, I would wait until uh, you see a little bit of foliage starting in the spring because that nitrate's just going to move around real fast. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, is there tissue testing to address nutrient needs before the tree becomes symptomatic?
Yes. Oh man, I took my tissue testing slides out because I thought it was too much, but I'm so glad you asked. Yeah, so there's a really good, actually, I'll put this link in the chat. There's a great resource all about leaf tissue testing. If you really want to know for sure if you have a nutrient deficiency, or just in general, if you want to know your nutrient status of your tree, you can actually collect leaf samples in the summertime and then send them to a lab. And then that lab will analyze them and then send you a little spreadsheet or a little like PDF that basically tells you um, what range you're in. So, for instance, like let's say in apples, let's say they send your result back and you have like 2% nitrogen is your result. That's pretty good because the range for that I think is like, maybe 1 to 2.5%. I'm kind of making that up. I can't remember the specific numbers, but that tells you, okay, cool, I'm in that safe zone, in that safe range. Um, but if it's like 0.5% or like 0.1%, then you have this really big nitrogen deficiency. So leaf issues testing is awesome. It's kind of probably more relevant for commercial growers, but if anyone actually really wants to know for sure what the nutrient status is, that is the best way to do that. And yeah, ideally doing that before the tree is symptomatic is amazing. If you are interested in doing that, that's the best way to go about actually knowing what the status is. Because sometimes those visual symptoms can be confusing. Like they can kind of look like, there are several things that might cause those symptoms, not just, you know, one specific nutrient or something. So yeah, let me look up that resource real quick. I'll put it in the chat.
And we have a list of testing labs at the help desk.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
What types of plants make good cover crops for fruit trees?
Great question. Okay, let me just put this link
Yeah.
here before. I have a really bad memory, so I feel like if I don't do this now, I might forget. Okay. So this is that link on tissue testing in the chat now. Oh, so many things. So yeah, you could even just go to like your local garden supply store and um, see what they have. There's a lot of times people recommend a mix, so not just doing, one species of cover crop, but doing, maybe a legume and a grain and a this and a that, so you have a kind of different benefits from different species. The legumes are going to fix nitrogen, which is nice. Um, if you have issues with compaction, there are certain cover crop species that can help with that, with their roots breaking up compaction. It kind of just depends on your specific situation, but generally a mix is good.
All right, good. Two mulch questions. First is this a good rule of thumb? Keep mulch 10 inches from the trunk and extend 1 inch beyond the leaf drip zone?
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up keeping it off of the trunk. That's really good. If you mound up a lot of mulch around the trunk, that's gonna retain a lot of moisture and then encourage trunk diseases, which we don't want. So yeah, I think making sure you leave a bit of a ring around the base of the trunk is great. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, extending 1 inch, 1 foot beyond leaf. Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay. And then the other one was compare arbor mulch to other wood chip mulch for clean, pathogen-free perspective. Are any sanitized or are others better than some better than others?
Uh, that's a good question. I'm not sure, honestly. It probably depends on your source. I feel like if you have a reputable source and yeah, they can guarantee that it's pathogen free, then that's good. I mean, if it's certified or, has some sort of stamp of approval or yeah, it can be hard. I mean, it's true with compost too. Like getting high quality compost is a whole other, sometimes challenge in our region. So I think, yeah, when you say arbor mulch, what exactly does that mean? Like from a arborist specifically, like from a commercial landscape
I
company that,
Yeah, I can answer that. I asked the question if that's a, let me get
yeah,
my camera back on. Sorry. Exactly that. Yes, it's mulch from an arborist, and that can be definitely can be a mixed. It can be well, it always often is mixed with multiple types of wood. Comparing that to purchasing, say, like a sequoia or a grab and grow or whatnot. And I understand that each arborist may or may not know exactly what's in the mulch, but just kind of trying to find the safest. I just don't know how much pathogens can transfer from mulch. Like, I just don't know how important the safety or trying to find safe mulch, if that was really the question, like what's, a good source? So we've used some from one arborist and then some from another, but just in general, can it be sanitized and or is organic or like you said, certified, just to try and make sure there's not pathogens. And kind of part of that question is, does it matter? Can it really transfer from mulch? Is there any danger of bad mulch?
yeah, thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, so the short answer is some pathogens can. I don't know how common it is here though, like in our region. And I think it really depends on where the arborist is working and like what, I mean, and a lot of times I think they should be able to tell like if a tree they're cutting down is diseased, like most arborists would be like, oh, that's, XYZ disease. So I would say if you have arborists that you know and trust, that's one thing. The safest bet is definitely going to be just going and purchasing mulch somewhere where they can say, okay, guarantee this is pathogen free. That will for sure be your safest bet. But I actually can't speak to like what diseases specific, like if it's really that common of a problem in arbor mulch here. I don't know. Has anyone ever encountered that issue here? Because I don't really work in landscape situations much, so I'm not really sure if that's an issue in our region. I don't know if Tim's still here.
Yeah, I'm
Tim.
still here.
Oh, okay. Hi. Yeah.
Hi,
Is this an issue here or maybe not?
I haven't heard of a specific issue recently. No.
Okay. Oh, I see Ginny in the chat said that she has. So
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe to play it safe, go to grab and grow or something. Yeah.
Yeah, on the coast, we have Monterey pines, which were transplanted from Monterey area, and there a lot of them have a fungal blight, a rust blight, but I don't know if it transfers to fruit trees. So I
Okay.
haven't heard anybody test it, but once the tree gets it, they all get it, and they're all getting it. So it could be an issue, but if it affects fruit trees and passes to them, I don't know.
Let's do these two citrus questions. We have a couple other questions in the chat that we'll answer otherwise, and we'll send out results. We'll send out the answers to those. But the when you see a cyclic yellowing to citrus that tends to resolve for the most part by summer, should you use a general fertilizer like EB Stone organic citrus or nitrogen alone like urea, which is referenced in the handbook? So I think the question is, should you use a full citrus fertilizer or is urea? I think. Is that right? Renee, you can always correct me.
That's correct. I saw a lot of reference to urea in the handbook with various,
Yeah, that's interesting.
amounts, and I've never used that.
Yeah, that's interesting to me too, because I feel like urea is more commonly used in commercial orchard settings and not so much in the backyard setting. But I can tell you what I do personally, and that is I get like a general fertilizer for citrus, and I'll apply it maybe every other year, maybe every year. It just depends on kind of what the symptoms look like. And I know in my head, like, okay, it's probably just because it's, cold out and it's these trees are sluggish, they're not picking up a lot right now, but I still put a little bit down. And the reason why I want to cover all my bases, so instead of just putting down nitrogen, which I know will just push out a lot of leaves and like a lot of leaf growth, I want to kind of cover my potassium, my calcium, like because those are important for fruit growth too. So I personally, that's the direction I would go and what I would recommend as well. But you don't have to, put on a ton of fertilizer. You can do it kind of as needed here and there, maybe small doses, maybe a little bit, twice a year or something like that, and just see how the tree responds and what it needs. Um, that's my approach, personally.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead? We'll answer the rest of these by email. Let's take a 10-minute break. So it's 11:46. Let's be back by 5 till. So we'll be back by 11:55. Should probably. The question says, when is the best time to prune if you want to prune when the tree is dormant, but avoid rain and rot?
Mhm.
How much of a window do you want from when you prune before there's rain or after?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say a week, about a week is good. The longer the better, generally. If you see you have a long dry spell ahead of you, that's great. Of course, sometimes it's hard to know what's going to happen. So, but yeah, I would say around a week more or less is good, but the longer the better. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. So my last section is on IPM, which stands for Integrated Pest Management. Real quick, have you guys had your IPM section yet? Just so I know how long to spend on it.
Yeah, no, we haven't.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to give you a really broad, big picture introduction to IPM, and then I'll give you some specific examples for key pests and fruit trees. Um, so this will be a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll give you some examples too. So, of course, the first big question we have to ask is, what is a pest? And I like to define this as just any unwanted organism that damages or interferes with plants. So, of course, that could be things like codling moth, like bugs, but it might also be weeds, diseases, rodents. So, broadly speaking, a pest really is just any living thing that harms the plants that we care about. And so, IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, this is a framework that we can use to manage pests and keep their damage at a reasonable level. And it's called integrated because we're integrating or combining multiple strategies. So we're not just doing one thing, for instance, spraying a pesticide or something. We're not just doing one strategy. We're combining multiple strategies, and we want to manage pest populations and keep that damage under a threshold that makes sense for you. So IPM is a big picture ecosystem-based approach. There's an emphasis on long-term pest prevention. And you can think about it as a toolbox approach. So you're going to select the tools or strategies that make sense for your unique context. There's really no one-size-fits-all solution. And in IPM, we try lots of other things first before using pesticides. So, it's okay to use pesticides, but only after you've tried lots of other things and have deemed that it's really necessary, and after monitoring indicates that they're needed. And of course, always following the label instructions for whatever product you choose. And we always want to use strategies that minimize risks to non-target organisms as well, including ourselves. So a lot of times in IPM courses or classes, you'll see triangles like this. This might come up later in your IPM class, but this is kind of a nice visual where we start at the bottom here where we want to identify and understand the pest before we do anything. So we want to make sure that we really know what's causing the issue. That UC IPM website is awesome for this. So definitely would highly recommend using that website. First and foremost, it's going to have California specific information. And then you can move up this triangle thinking through what cultural controls make sense, how sanitation could help. Maybe there's physical or mechanical methods, biological control methods. And then, if you really need to, there are chemical options. So that's why it's kind of the last thing at the top there. But another way you can think about IPM is kind of as a cycle. So both of these visuals I think are helpful, but they're just a little bit different. Where on the right here, we're thinking about it more as a process. And that's responsive, it's integrated, it's not too prescriptive. But again, we're starting with identification, monitoring, taking action, seeing if it worked or how well it worked, and then continuing to keep an eye out and inspect the issue. So, getting into this in a little more depth, we start with inspection, what's going on out there, and then correctly identifying the pest is really, really key. Because if you end up thinking, oh, it's this one bug, but then it's actually something completely different, then you're going to do all of these other strategies, and it's not going to have an effect. So you want to make sure you correctly identify the pest. And then you want to scout and keep records over time. When does this pest emerge? When do I start seeing this damage? When do I start seeing this pest out there? What's, their population levels over time? It can be nice to keep records or just jot down some notes because year to year it might change or maybe it's the same. You want to consult resources, take some action, try some strategies out, assess whether they worked, and then reevaluate and refine your approach over time. So here's some examples. We've got choosing resistant crop varieties. So for instance, the frost variety of peaches, it has resistance to peach leaf curl, which is a disease. So many of you probably know peach leaf curl is a really prevalent disease in our area. So if you're able to just select a peach variety that is resistant or at least pretty tolerant to that disease, then you really don't have as much to worry about later. There's lots of different ways you can scout for pests. Sticky traps are great for that. Cultural practices like sanitation. When I say sanitation, in this case, I'm just saying we want to remove apples from the orchard floor, from, around the base of your tree, because they can host codling moth. So, that's just one way that you can keep your orchard, quote unquote, clean from pests and reduce their habitat. And then there's all kinds of biological control options. Just one example here is encouraging gopher predation with raptor perches. Obviously, if you have trees nearby where they can perch, that's great too. But if you don't, installing some raptor perches or owl boxes can be nice. Nice way to encourage that. So you probably all know about this website already, but just in case, I'm going to walk you through the UC IPM website very briefly. So, for your purposes, you want to go to the homepage here and then see the Home and Landscape button. And that's going to take you here. And for our presentation today, we're talking about fruit trees. So I just went ahead and clicked on this link for fruit trees. And then it gives you this nice list of different types of fruit trees, nuts, berries, and grapevines. I went with apples because that's what we have most of here. And then you get to this page with so much information about, first of all, cultural tips. So how to just maintain healthy trees. And then you get into all of these different invertebrate pests, get into diseases, environmental disorders, and so on. So this is a really nice place to go and see, okay, if I'm having some pest issues in apples, what could be some of the options for what I'm looking at? And maybe you even think, oh, I think I'm looking at codling moth, for instance. You can click on that and then that page will help you verify if that's really what you're dealing with. But for an example, I went with European canker because that's another really common one. We have a lot of canker issues in our region. So this is going to tell you, what this disease is, what this pathogen that causes the disease is. It's going to go into identification. What are you going to look for? And then its life cycle, which is really helpful to understand. And then you can't see it because I had to crop the page somewhere, but farther down, there's a lot of information about IPM strategies, so what you can do about it. So some more examples of common pests in our area for fruit trees. We talked about gophers already. Rodents in general, especially gophers, are a big problem. In apples and pears, we've got canker diseases, fire blight. The biggest insect pest for olives is olive fruit fly. I mentioned peach leaf curl, it's really prevalent. HLB, vectored by Asian citrus psyllid. This isn't here yet, but it's just a good disease to be aware of that's spreading throughout California in citrus. So thankfully not a huge problem here currently, but something that you should probably just have on your radar. So I included a couple of slides on this. So the Asian citrus psyllid is a small insect with mottled brown wings shown here. It produces this visible waxy deposits that direct honeydew away from their bodies, and they vector the pathogen that causes HLB disease. So this is also known as citrus greening. It's a serious threat to citrus trees worldwide. It's had a lot of really negative impacts on the citrus industry, especially in Florida. And the symptoms include yellow shoots with pale green and yellow fleshes, asymmetrically mottled or leathery leaves, misshapen fruit, and there's more symptoms on the UCIPM webpage. So again, this isn't really a problem here yet, but I just want to make sure people know about it. And here's the quarantine zone that has been expanding over time. So for the sake of this example, for monitoring, you want to inspect citrus trees, report any infestations to the Ag Commissioner's office. You can control ants because they farm the psyllid honeydew and protect psyllids. There are a number of different predators and parasites, including parasitoid wasps, and there's chemical control options too. So moving on to an issue that definitely is present here in our area, peach leaf curl, really prevalent. Some years worse than others. It's caused by Tephrina deformans, which is a fungal pathogen. It overwinters on branches and in branches. The spores, like you can see them down here, it's kind of a cool photo. The spores are dispersed by rain, and leaf symptoms start around 2 weeks after leaves emerge from buds. And it starts off as like reddish areas on developing leaves, but then pretty quickly can progress into this pretty intense distortion, as you can see here. Really crinkled leaves, they're pink, they've got these like kind of weird blisters. This is really characteristic of peach leaf curl. So if you see this, you can be pretty confident that's most likely what you're dealing with. Here are a couple more photos from a professor of mine back in the day, Dr. Sally Miller. So symptoms include leaf deformation, defoliation if it's really severe. This can reduce yield, and it can stunt tree growth too. So what can you do about this? You can choose resistant varieties. There's actually quite a few out there, and I've heard lately from growers that there's some that taste really good too, so it's not, you're not necessarily sacrificing quality or flavor or anything for that benefit. Just bear in mind, removing the diseased leaves really doesn't do much, so trying to pick the leaves off isn't going to help at all because this disease really survives in the twigs and the branches. You can thin the fruit a bit to reduce the demand on the plant. That can kind of take the edge off a little bit, reduce stress. And you can dormant prune prior to fungicide to remove inoculum. So the big thing, in addition to all of that, the big thing you can really focus on is dormant fungicide sprays with fixed copper products. So these are organic products, and you can apply after the leaves have fallen in the autumn. And sometimes, typically, a single early treatment is going to be enough. But if you have a lot of rainfall, you could apply it again at flower bud development before the green leaf tips are visible too. So one application is good. Might want to do two if it rains a lot. So another really big common example in our region is codling moth, unfortunately. This is a really, really big insect pest of apples and pears in our region. It causes a ton of damage in commercial growers' systems, but also really on any apple or pear tree in our region. So codling moth tunnel into fruit and damage it and leave this frass, which is a fancy word for bug poop. As you can see here, that we've got this little larva that is tunneling in and just wrecking this fruit. The wormy fruit can contain aflatoxin from mold, so that is just something to bear in mind. You don't want to eat this. So for the life cycle, the larvae overwinter in cocoons under the bark and in soil and debris, like those apples I showed you on the ground. The larvae pupate in cocoons, emerge as adults in the early spring as moths, and here's what the moths look like. And they deposit eggs on fruit, leaves, and branches. The young larvae bore into the fruit and complete development actually in the fruit, and then they drop to the soil under the tree to search for a pupation site. And you might have 2 to 4 generations per year or even more. I've heard some growers say that they're thinking it's even more than that in some cases. So you're going to get a lot of moths out there. It's a really, really big problem. So what do you do about this? To start with, you can select early maturing varieties. They're going to be less susceptible just because you're getting the fruit out of the orchard sooner. Sanitation, like I mentioned, is really important. Regularly remove and destroy infested fruit, including fruit that's on the tree. If you can see that there's codling moth in it, getting it out of the orchard is important because it's just going to reproduce, create more. You could put bags on fruit. I think this sort of physical protection is more useful if you just have a couple trees. Of course, if you have a lot of trees, it's not really a good use of time probably, but it can help. You're excluding the pest that way. Trapping can be helpful to monitor. It's not going to really reduce populations, but monitoring and trapping can be really helpful to watch population shifts over time and know, oh man, I found 10 of these guys in this trap today, so it's getting bad. I need to do something to take a new action, try a new strategy. So it can be helpful to guide your decisions. I do think trunk banding is a great strategy for people who just have a small number of trees, or even a small orchard. And this is just like putting a cardboard band around the trunk, and this traps the mature larvae as they're climbing up the trunk. And they think that, ooh, this is a good place for me to reproduce, and then they sort of tunnel into that cardboard instead of the tree. And then as long as you're on top of it, you can remove that band once you see that they're there, and then just destroy it or put it in the trash. Insecticides, there are a lot of insecticide options out there. Some are organic, like spinosad is an organic product, and that can help. Monitoring also will help with timing your insecticide spray if you end up going that route. Okay, so moving on to branch caker on apple, just have a couple more examples. So this one's really common too, I think because we have a lot of, rain and foggy weather relative to other areas of California that encourages a lot of fungal pathogens, unfortunately, but the symptoms are really interesting. So you'll see this sort of like darkened areas on branches. If you kind of cut away a little bit around something you think might be a canker, you'll see this orangey or reddish discoloration. If it's really bad, and if it's been developing for a while on a large scaffold branch and you cut into it, you'll see these rings and like water-soaked lesions. This is not normal. That's definitely signs of this fungal issue. And then if it's really bad, this one, like you can see how these concentric rings actually go out really far, and this shows that kind of how the disease started here in the middle and then progressed outwards over time. So this is a pretty severe situation, but it can be pretty bad. So I kind of mentioned this already, but brown lesions on branches, branch dieback, the wood tissue under the lesions is going to be water soaked and a little orange or red. And eventually they do just grow bigger and bigger over time. They can become elliptical, sunken, having these like concentric calluses. Here's what their spores look like, which is pretty cool. This is from a collaborator I work with at UC Davis. So they overwinter on dead branches, and then their spores spread during rainfall, dew, or fog. And they land on fresh leaf scars or pruning wounds or broken branches, and they colonize that exposed plant tissue. So that's how they kind of get into the plant. So what can you do about this? Again, you want to scout regularly, catch it early. Pruning out cankers on branches is a good idea. Or if you do this in the early summer, it's helpful because the disease spread is a lot less likely at that point. We just don't get as much rain or any rain usually in the summer. So that can be a nice time to do this. However, you'll have leaves. It might be kind of hard to see where things are at. But you want to remove dead branches a few inches below the canker tissue. So just cutting until you see clean tissue, but making sure you're sanitizing your pruning tools because spores can and inoculum can survive on your tools. And you could use like a 70% isopropyl alcohol water solution, just for instance. And again, you want to remove all of your diseased debris out of the orchard as soon as you can because that inoculum can spread back up into healthy trees. There are some biologically based pruning wound protectants out there. So these products, you can spray them on pruning wounds right after you prune, and they're going to compete with and exclude plant pathogens. There's a variety of different products out there that do this. They're not sealants, so they're not like a paint that acts as a physical barrier. These are actually alive. These are beneficial microbes that compete with a pathogen on the pruning wound surface. So that's kind of interesting. So just to conclude, I want to emphasize IPM is a process. It's a lot of trial and error, and every year is different. So, it's good to be proactive, to be out there inspecting your tree, keeping an eye on things, but just know every year is different and it gets easier over time. The more you try things out and pay attention to how your tree responds. And I just want to bring this back up from the very beginning where I talked about, all these different subjects, these different aspects of management, things we do to take care of our fruit trees. All of this other stuff makes IPM easier. So making sure your plants are healthy, they have what they need, they're protected, they're pruned right. All of this is going to make pest management and just what you have to do out there a lot easier. So I just want to kind of wrap up on that note. And then that promotes regional crop system health and ecosystem health too. So the more we can control issues like codling moth, even if you just have a couple apple trees, if you're doing your part on your apple trees to control codling moth, that is a big deal for nearby apple growers. They will appreciate that so much because we do have like a lot of apple orchards around our area where they've been neglected and I think have a lot of codling moth issues. So that's just one example, but yeah, it's about your trees, but it's also about our region too. And of course, all of these things are intertwined in real life. They're not discrete subjects. Everything affects everything else. And so, yeah, you can just respond to what you observe at your site. Every site's unique. And yeah, make sure you're responsive and not too prescriptive about it. Also, okay, last thing, I just wanted to mention there's a really great Principles of Fruit and Nut Tree Growth, Cropping, and Management course. It's a 5-day course in March every year at UC Davis. That's really great, taught by some professors that I really admire a lot from my days when I was there. They're teaching this course. So if you really want to deep dive, I highly recommend checking that out. We also have a home orchard handbook that you all probably are familiar with too. All right, so thanks so much, everyone. And that's all I've got. We're at, let's see, almost 12:20. So I'm wondering, should we do some questions or how much time have we got at this point?
Let's do a few questions. Thank you so much. What a fabulous lecture. We're loving it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for saying that. Yeah, no problem.
So great. Here's a question. Is copper spray damaging to soil or pollinators?
Oh, that's a great question. Soil, not so much. I'm trying to think about pollinate. I think copper sprays are usually used more for like disease prevention. It's kind of like a barrier. It's a barrier protectant spray that reduces risk of pathogen spread. I am not sure about effects on pollinators, but I can look that up. Or if someone else happens to know that off the top of their head, does anyone know?
No. I was just thinking that they're usually sprayed as dormant sprays. So the pollinators are
Yeah.
less of an issue. So Then is branch canker only on apple or is it also on stone fruit?
Ooh, it can show up on stone fruit too. I've seen it the most in apple. I don't know if that's just because there are more apple trees here.
Okay.
But yeah, it can show up on other fruit trees too. Yeah.
There was a question about canker and fire blight, and do they look similar? And how
Oh, yeah. So fire blight has a lot of symptoms. I have slides on this, but it's not in this presentation. So fire blight, you're gonna see all kinds of things. The characteristic symptoms are like a hooked kind of shape of your twigs. So like the ends of shoots are gonna like look like a shepherd's hook. You might have like bacterial ooze coming out of fruit. Um, and then you also can have cankers with fire blight. But with these fungal pathogens, you're not going to have all of those other fire blight symptoms too, of course. Um, and I think with the cankers that are caused by fungal pathogens, you're going to see over time more of the like concentric rings, and um, the cankers can look a little bit different, but in general, they're also I think easy to confuse. So I would just say keep an eye out for those characteristic fire blight symptoms that would cue you and say, oh, that's definitely, fire blight, because those are more easy to um, separate out, if that makes sense.
That's great. Okay, I think we will stop here and we'll answer the rest of these questions in the chat. We'll answer them as we go along. So,
Okay.
anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
And you have a copy of the PowerPoint, I believe. So if anyone wants a copy of it, feel free to share it with anyone.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ellie,
Yeah.
excellent.
Ellie.
Yes, the slides are on Campus Extension. Okay, so they've already been posted on Campus Extension. Good. And the next thing, in the chat, there were some comments about eucalyptus mulch. And while Ellie was talking, I was looking it up under EDU sites. So there are plenty of conflicting ideas. So this is a good example of home knowledge versus being an agent of the UC system. So look up some of those EDU sites. So when you type in your search engine, put .edu after it, and look for some UCANR sites. I saw several articles saying that eucalyptus mulch was not an issue, was not toxic. So it's an interesting thing to research, and let's make sure that we're doing it as UC, agents of UC, which I just wanted to mention. Okay. We will talk more about that.